Okay, we're now recording, and I want you all to know that if you are interested, and I do want to admit Adka. Welcome, Adka. Nice that you're here. I have to make sure that I double check from time to time. As you come in, feel free to, you can have your video on. I know that some people have expressed an interest in that. And you can also leave it off, and you can, but what I do ask is, especially in the Zoom environment, is that you do leave your microphone muted until you have something to share, and you know, we can arrange for that too. So as we get started, I just wanted to start off by welcoming you back, and I have to get the I see what I did. I'm sharing the participant charts. Okay, so let me go ahead and do a new share. I'll get it back on. All right, I think you can now see the class 3 slides, and so I'll just do a double check in the chat. Someone like to put on the chat if you can see the slides? Okay, thank you, Laura. All right. Well, let's just welcome each other back. It's nice to be back. It is probably the first time in the entire time I've taught that I actually had to start a class and then postpone it. And I've done it for all my classes, so it was quite an experience for me to do that. It was very difficult for me to even contemplate doing that, but it was very correct for me to have taken some time. I see there's Rachita, welcome to you. And as you come in, you want to double check your microphone is muted. I can hear some noise. And so go ahead and take a moment, Rachita. Actually, I can do it for you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Happy Valentine's. There, you're muted now. All right, so as we get started, this means too that we need to have a change to our schedule. And so we are meeting still on the same day, same time. We have now an interesting situation where when we get to class 7 and 8, we will have changed our clocks in the United States. And so it's still the same local time for those in an area that change their clocks at exactly the same time that we do. But for those people in other areas of the world that have different days that they change their clock or maybe never change their clock, then there is a different GMT time. And so be alert to whatever your local time is. Be sure that you kind of fix that, okay? Can I enlarge the screen to full screen? You know, I can try, but when I do that, what happens, I believe, and I'm going to give it a try now. What sometimes happens is my access to the ability to see chat or my controls sometimes goes away. So I was reluctant to do that. Let's see, however, if this how does that work for you? Did that fix it? No, it didn't? Oh, okay. That's awful. You're zooming in on the PDF. Okay, then I will go back. Then what I need to do is pause it so that I can get this. I'm just going to close it. How does that work? Someone on the chat? It does work, okay. Thank you, Mona. I have on my calendar that daylight savings time starts on the 11th of March. So I don't know if that's the same everywhere in the world, but it's I believe what it is in the United States. The PDF is cut off. That might be a screen adjustment for you. Is that true for everyone? Okay, so that might be your own screen. What happens usually in that situation is you just have to use your scroll bar to see it or to, you know, have it come back in. Yeah, that's a variation I can't do anything about. So let's go ahead and I believe that all of you can see this. It says my desktop is paused, so I think that's just fine. And so let's jump in. So here's going to be our schedule, and zoom out a little bit will be good. You know what I need to do, Jasper, because wow. I had no problems with this yesterday. So I don't know what's going on, quite honestly, with that. I'm on a new share. You might want to refresh your screen. Just press with your mouse. The minus sign. No, that didn't work. Now we are back to my desktop. Is that right? Everyone see just my, how's that? Can you see that? Better? Thank you. Perfect. Let's go with success. All right, folks. My goodness. Let's just jump in then. Oh my goodness. This is crazy. All right. Well, this is the schedule. And you can just double check. I know that it's for sure going to be 16 GMT and till we actually change our clocks in the United States, and then it goes to 15 GMT. And so we can do another double check to make sure that that's all confirmed by everyone's schedules. And so what I also needed to do is there are several of you in this class who had signed up for the March ABC, and boy, did that cause some complications, right? And that's because the class was supposed to start literally the next Wednesday at the exact same time. So what I've done is rearrange the March ABC schedule to arrange around this class. Since you are, you know, participating in both, I'm very happy to make sure that's taken care of. So we'll have our class 1, same start date, March 12th, then we have March 19th. We'll also do another one on Monday because it's not going to be Monday and Wednesdays until this class is over. So on the 4th class, we will meet on a Wednesday. We are also going to skip April 9th, so you can work on your keynoting, and we will end on April 11th. I will admit Seema, welcome. And Richard, it looks like you're back. Welcome. And so we've just gotten started. And I'm going to now just go ahead and start our program today. We've been talking about our centers, and remember what we're looking at here is centers as they relate to our conditioning. And honestly, the conditioning that you can witness when you start stepping back and being a very observant witness to life around you, including your own behaviors, your own thought processes. And so what's happening when we're going through these centers is we're examining them as if they are, a focal point. But remember, in your real life, as you're really going through things, you're experiencing your life with the centers all kind of integrated with, each other and with, just things you're going through. And so it can be very difficult sometimes to isolate, or at least to try to focus on where the conditioning is coming from and even the patterns that have been set through the years. So as we go through and start examining the functionality of the center, the way it operates, what is it offering? Is it an awareness center like we're looking at today, or is it a pressure center like we looked at in our last class? And how is that experienced? What are the themes associated with it? You'll start to, as you're observing yourself, be able to almost dissect a little bit more where the origination of some of your habits, your mental habits, not self habits, might be coming from. It's just something that I noticed as I was going through, because it took me a long time, many years, because I had so much openness in my design, to discern the difference between when I had conditioning coming from an open awareness center or an open motor or an open G center, for example, because I just was experiencing life through my mind and what my mind was interpreting. And so what is awareness center when I'm talking about awareness? Well, the awareness centers, because a lot of times people have different ideas of what being aware is and what awareness center means. But these centers function to make us aware of our surroundings so that we're reacting in an appropriate way with what's actually happening. And I can hear some breathing, so you might want to just double check, all of you that are new to the classroom. Make sure you've got your microphone muted. And so this awareness helps us determine what we should pay attention to. If you really think about it, to be alive, you've got to survive. And yet we're here for more than that. We're here to evolve, to continue to develop, and, certainly develop when it comes to our awareness. And so these centers that you see here, these three, are relatively different in terms of their age. And when I say age, there's, the splenic center, which, way back in our evolutionary process, it really came about 4 million years ago. So a splenic awareness is something that, we share obviously with what we would say is our evolutionary ancestors, mammals. We are mammals, and so going way back to when we were 5-centered, which is what mammals are, there was always the awareness that comes from the splenic side. And that has a certain way of functioning and a certain way of protecting us, keeping us alive. And then about 90,000 years ago, we had self-reflected consciousness available because we started a new kind of awareness that was really available to what was then the 7-centered being that we evolved from. And so there was an emphasis and a development and an evolvement of awareness that became self-reflected. And those two awareness centers is truly what the awareness was all about for a seven-centered being. And then there was a shift and a continued evolution of the potential for awareness in our forms, and our forms being our matrix from which we are, able to function. And in the nine-centered world of our nine-centered matrix, there is a new emerging awareness center that we really are seeing here as the solar plexus. It's only been around for us, in the 2,500 years that it's been a part of, the development of a center. So these three centers offer a form of intelligence, but they're different. And it's not the same as saying intellect. The intellect is really pretty much focused on what we refer to as the ajna awareness, and what we look to as, our cognitive intelligence in that way. But there's more to intelligence than just the mind. So the oldest center, as I mentioned, is the splenic center. And it's more than the spleen. I see that it says spleen on your slide, but it's splenic awareness, because what it's really involving is the splenic system. It's the immune system. And so one more thing on this slide that is actually not correct is that the biological correspondence you see says lymphatic, which is true, the lymphatic system, and it says autoimmune system. It's really the immune system. Auto means, it's sort of the opposite of, it's sort of not functioning as an immune system. It's, in some cases, those with an autoimmune disease, their system is actually attacking the very thing that is actually healthy for them. So this part of our awareness, these three centers and how they've been evolving, offer different contexts from which to react to the world and what's really appropriate to react to and what's going on, and how to continue to develop. So this one that we're looking at right now is all about our well-being. These themes you see at the top are keynotes that really help you determine what is the essence of this center. It provides your well-being. The immune system offers you a protection. It's scanning and filtering what's happening around you, not in the last few minutes, but in the moment to moment to moment. It's like having the radar that knows exactly right now if this is going to offer well-being, safety, security or not. And if it's not, it needs to fight against you letting go of things that are not good for it, or hanging on to things that are good for it. So it offers protection, safety. It's the essence of, our health, survival. And also you can even put that into the frame of reference of values, because we have and create values based on what is going to be protecting us or healthy for us, and what can allow us to maintain a certain ability to do that. So this old system is one that has to operate in a very, in the moment alertness. It's vital that it remain alert, because if it's focused on just what you're thinking about, it's not paying attention to the signals that are coming from the body. It's a physical awareness system. Have any of you had any and been the observer of maybe mammals or pets in your household? We saw, I think it was you, Laura, I think it was your dog sleeping on the couch when we were coming into class today. And when I had my dog, I had never seen it before, but if someone knocked on the door, the back of her neck puffed up. Has anyone ever kind of seen that before? It's kind of interesting. But, you know, it puffed up because there was a physical reaction of alertness. And that alertness is, oh yeah, that's okay. It was an adorable dog. And that alertness gets them ready to react to whatever they need to do to encounter what that new thing that just occurred, a knock on the door, was alerting them to. So it is moment to moment to moment. It operates correctly by filtering out what's good for you or hanging on, sometimes letting go based on what's healthy. You know, you eliminate things out of your system, out of your body, toxins, for example. And so it's kind of like if you read in your manual, they describe an analogy of it being like a washing machine. It sort of keeps things clean. It gets rid of the dirt, you know, the toxins, the things that are not good for you. And so there is a sense of well-being. When you are an open splenic being and you're around someone who has it defined, you know, there is a temporary, consistent way that you're filtering your immune system that can create a feeling of feeling good. You can also become very dependent on that kind of experience. You can be deeply conditioned by someone that when you're around them suddenly triggers a feeling of safety and security. Whether it is true or not depends on really what's happening in the moment and what's right for you. Their reactions may be healthy for them, but not for you. And you don't have consistent access to that within your own natural state if it's open. Doesn't mean you don't have an immune system. It doesn't mean you don't have a way of experiencing safety and protection, but it comes from another place. It comes from your authority. So this alertness is necessary in terms of being able to know in the moment what your awareness center, this splenic center, is saying if you're defined. And if you're not defined there, then you are open to the conditioning influences, the frequencies coming from others and triggering your own immune system in a way that is also exaggerated to whatever it's synthesizing as an experience from all over. And it's something to bear in mind. So if you take a look at the essence of a not self, it comes right down to, are you holding on to your relationships or anything really? It could be a tangible thing. It could be a job. It could be a home. It could, but you know, relationships are a part of life too. It could be all of those things that may not be good for you. And so when I considered, you know, things that our mind says are good for us, like, you know, gee, I have to stay in this job because it's providing the money I have to survive. That may or may not be true. By the way, it could be actually something that's very unhealthy for you. But the only way you can know that is to really navigate through all these circumstances through your own authority. Now, why would the question here be, do I lack flexibility? Anything that is open is there to be very flexibly adapting to all the kinds of conditioning that can come through that, not attached to it, not holding on to it, not trying to maintain it, but just being, you know, present and flexibly engaged with it while following your strategy and authority. And so do you find, is the question from Laura, do you find that those with an open splenic center are highly empathetic? Or was that empathetic? Was that the word you were saying? Highly empathic. You know, I don't have an opinion about that. I find at this stage in your experiment, it is better to leave very open conclusions. Be the observer without any conclusions at a very, very early stage. Does that make sense to everyone? Because then you don't lock yourself into a certain way of evaluating whether a person's being correct or not. And I find that there's too many variables. But I do have patterns I notice with certain configurations that I do share my own personal stories to emphasize and to give people a way to relate to. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment. But the lack of flexibility could be true for any center. And so if a person's not adapting moment to moment to moment, then they aren't being flexible with what's really happening and that they need to utilize to react appropriate to a circumstance. So these kinds of not self-talks will surface. Things like, well, let's not do that because it's going to make me feel very insecure. I mean, the feeling of insecurity is not always comfortable, right? And if it's not comfortable and it's making you insecure, there's a feeling, well, then I'll avoid it because I'm afraid or I feel fearful every time I do that. The thing is that when your mind is really focused on what you are not, which is its orientation, it's always measuring and comparing things that are consistent or not and checking in with things that are not consistent, then what it's adapting to and what it's trying to figure out is what is a strategy for dealing with this fearful thing or this thing I'm not feeling secure about or confident in. And so it can create and emphasize and focus on the feelings of fear that may or may not be real. I've had triggers from the past when I talked about pressures. There's certain pressures you can experience and you retain that. You remember these things. When it comes to the splenic awareness, has anyone here ever had food poisoning? I hope not, but have you? Anyone experienced it? It is not recommended. It's not fun. In fact, if ever I wanted to just give it all up and die, it was probably in those moments. I had it one time in college. I had eaten at a fast food place, and it was bad food, and I just had a terrible, terrible bout of food poisoning. And what happened is it actually, well, it kind of locked into my mental splenic awareness, and I kind of held on to that as a memory in my body that to this day I can't walk into that particular form or chain of restaurants. I can't. I mean, I have a physical reaction. I mean, I could. That's an exaggeration. And so my conditioning would be to avoid it. My conditioning would be to say this is going to happen again. Whether that's true or not is obviously not something I should be hanging on to. And so yes, Annette, you have no gates at all in your splenic center. And that's also true, by the way, for Roxana. And just so you think about how that plays out, there is no context for knowing what to fear. That means that at times, and maybe you can look back over your life, Annette and Roxana, were you ever in a situation where people would say you were being fearless? There was really no concept that maybe I should be a little afraid right now. And not just afraid, but fearless. I mean, it's like, put a helmet on that kid because they do not know you can't fly off your roof, and just see if you can fly. There was a woman who was in one of my Living Your Design workshops. She got pregnant in the Living Your Design class, and and it wasn't because she was in the class, obviously. And so she went through her pregnancy all the way through rave cartography, and then after it was over, we had some sessions on her son, and he had absolutely no gates in the splenic center. And she couldn't work. She had to spend all of her days and nights running around after this little toddler who was investigating everything, wanting to put his fingers in electrical outlets and oh my God, just everything and anything. And so he was a danger to himself because he had no fear about, well, gee, what would happen if I did this? Now, he could experience pain and learn. Obviously, you can all learn through your experiences. But there is a caution built in to people that have somewhat of a um, open spleen that maybe has some parts of you that gets triggered, that kind of taps into an internal mechanism. And there's also times when you're defined that you just know you don't really want to do that. You're kind of more protective of yourself. So you see these things, and you also see people who are completely shut down by fear. So because it's a duality. It can be both. So those with the totally open splenic center can be really, overwhelmed by all the possibilities that could happen and be very, very fearful of just about everything. So both extremes are obviously a potential. But it's not just about safety. It could be about upsetting someone. I had a student once who was becoming a guide ask, well, how could this phrase represent the splenic center? That sounds to me like avoiding conflict and truth, which is a not self behavior for an open solar plexus. Well, if that person is tied to your own sense of dependency, if you have and splenic center can create codependencies, then you may, again, on both sides, you could have a defined splenic center and someone becomes highly dependent on that. A codependency can be created in all kinds of ways, but not wanting to upset that person, because then, you envision all the things that could happen as a result of that could actually put you in danger, or make your life a little more uncomfortable, like jobs, or agreeing to do things just because your boss says you have to, and that's because you're afraid if you don't follow exactly those steps, you would actually maybe lose your job. So Jasper's comment: if you have an undefined spleen, would the active gates be consistent as an experience? I think the right term, Jasper, is if it's undefined and you have defined gates, we call those dormant gates. And what it means is that when you're being conditioned, those dormant gates are very well defined in just the experience they would filter through. It doesn't mean that all the other gates that are open in your spleen don't offer a big mixture of all kinds of other stuff. So, but it does give you some sense of a consistency with that theme. That I think is what you're saying. And yes, that's true, but it also means that you have a certain hook out there dangling around saying, hey, anyone want to match up with my gate? Let's, it's a good word, Annette, trigger. You've got triggers that can happen on a regular basis. When it's totally open, you're just taking in whatever is around, and it can vary. And so there is more of a neutral experience. It's not tapping into your own cellular experience in the same kind of in-your-face way. But all of these things we're looking at the detail level, go back up a few levels, because that's where the real issues are. The real issues. It doesn't mean you're always sensitive, because it depends on where your mental focus is too, Jasper. It may be something you're not even paying any attention to. It may not be the focus of your awareness at all. You might be experiencing conditioning. I can, on days with neutrino conditioning, I can experience something totally different because that's not where my focus is. So when I'm afraid of doing something, I'm creating a scenario in my mind that may prevent me from really reacting the way I would have if I wasn't focused on my mental talk and fears. So these gates, I know we say we're not going to talk about gates, but the awareness centers all come with fears, and they're triggers. You know, there's, by the way, nothing wrong with fear. Fear is actually something that you can you can be alert to, you can become aware of, you can investigate, and that's really what it's about, is investigating things, you know, that you're not aware, that you're not certain of, so that you do have the ability to react if it's an imminent danger. So fear is going to be there whether it's defined or not. If it's open, it's what you're going to think about and focus on. Fears can be amplified, distorted, like, you know, this trigger of an old memory of being, you know, what it felt like to be going through food poisoning will give me a certain change in the way I am open to things or not. So the existence of fear isn't the problem. It's a focus on if that then changes behavior, reactions, and what you do about something. So these words that you see next to the gates, the gate of depth, for example, is the keynote of it's an actual keynoted essence or of a formula based on the themes of that gate. The fear that it brings out is a fear of inadequacy. But what made those comments clear to me as a student was reading the little descriptor to the right, because then I didn't just look at the fear of death and think that anybody with that is afraid to die. That may not be true. More appropriate is, you know, this is a gate that is maybe so afraid that you're not going to fulfill your purpose before you die. You may never want to take risks, or you may take so many risks because you're so afraid that, you know, time is of the essence and you've got to do it now. Or what's wrong, or you could be very depressed or very melancholic because you don't feel like you're tapped into your real purpose. Or maybe even worse, life doesn't have a purpose unless you take risks. So these are the themes that can surface for anyone who basically is alive and has a splenic center, but some more than others because they are things they're learning and experiencing on an ongoing basis as they fulfill their life. So there can be, you know, gates where you're afraid of authority figures, like the 18, where, you know, other people could, you know, have an authority over you, and it may not, and their authority may not be correct for you. You know, like a parent, or like going to court and having a judge determine your, you know, your future, whether you're in jail or not, all of these things. So there can be a sudden flash of intuition with the 57 that says, be afraid of what's coming, what could be in the future. This intuition. But the inadequacy is that you don't have the depth needed to correct a solution or situation. So these fears, the one I have is a fear of responsibility. It's a big one. And I actually learned some of my most valuable lessons from that pet I talked about a minute ago. When I was young, we went on a family vacation, and the pet we had at the time was being taken care of by someone, and the very first day we were gone, it got out and got run over by a car. And so as a child, my first deep experience of conditioning with that was, you have to be responsible if you're taking care of something, or it can die. I wanted another pet, but I was afraid to ever have another pet because they'll die. The first thing I thought of, as soon as you get a pet and fall in love with your pet, they're going to die. And I don't want to ever go through that pain again. And so I wanted a pet, but it was sort of a love-hate experience of that. And then for my 40th birthday, I got a gift of a dog, and she tested the limits for me on this fear of responsibility. I was so afraid that whatever happened, I wouldn't take care of her, that if she sneezed, I took her to the vet. If, whatever it was, I was just caught up rigidly, inflexibly in fear of being this responsible pet owner, and took on too much responsibility. I had to learn to let go, to lighten up. The Splenic Center is a great place to lighten up. Don't take life so serious. Enjoy the moment. And she really tested that. She was a dog. She would get into whatever she got into, but she made it for years and years and years and years and years. She taught me what I could be responsible for and what I couldn't. And as a teacher, you have to also really know what you're responsible for and what you're not. I'm not, for example, responsible for someone getting their own experience of awareness of living their design. I have, great admiration for people on the quest. I'm here to support that quest. I can't be responsible for what they get or don't get. It's part of knowing truly what is the potential of the openness, which is wisdom. So all of you have opportunities to learn through fear, and we can all get identified with them. The key is to follow your strategy here. Whoops. Oh, so sorry. I was trying to get to chat. And just to again emphasize for Jasper, it doesn't mean you're necessarily extra sensitive. Certain designs can be highly sensitive to things. So I just wanted to make sure I addressed that. So 47% of the population having it open creates the potential on one extreme of the mind having a focus on a certain strategy. If you have no consistent access to, quote unquote, your own washing machine feel good in the body that sort of, eliminates the things that might not be good for you, toxins or whatever, then once you experience anything that you relate to and identify with making that feel good happen, you tend to not want to get rid of it. And I do notice a tendency, especially after a move like I just made, of my, my mind can think of every type of future scenario of how I could use something to my benefit. And it makes it hard to let go of something I really am not using for the last 10 years. And so you have to kind of face those circumstances where is carrying this thing around from year to year to year better for me than that one moment that may or may not happen in the future that I use it? And those are the kinds of things that your mind won't let you be open to. It just kind of, oh, well, it doesn't take up that much space. I'll just stick it here. So not self-decisions. You may not think about them at the core of where they're coming from, but it could be, well, I'll just stay here. It's not the best place to live, but it's, I don't know where else I'd go, and there's always the possibility it would be worse. It takes bravery to actually follow your strategy and authority when you don't know where there's going to leave. Mona says pressure's undefined to let go of things that are good. Well, yeah, that's true because it is a duality, Mona. And so sometimes, even in a conditioning, when suddenly you're feeling very brave and safe and secure, you may then say, well, I'm just going to get rid of something then. I don't need this. I'm strong without it. I don't need that. And then maybe you did, because the whole point is you can't decide this through this splenic center. Either way, there is no consistent internal natural part of you, in your form, in your body, that is, going to filter correctly your way. You got to let go of that as an authority. And so, again, Pam, have you seen the feel good in the body relate to things like sugar and caffeine? Sugar and caffeine can be related to that with the splenic center if it's defined through the root, because a lot of that is coming through, sort of a rush of adrenaline, Pam. And that there's always extremes, right? You get a little too much sugar, it does not feel too good. A little too much caffeine, not gonna feel good. Mona's comment, it goes back to being a bully, defined on undefined. Yeah, that can happen. That can be, but it's more, rather than being a bully, it can be more of, it's an overwhelming experience on the other side that a person can't necessarily avoid. I mean, it's just something they have to deal with when it's coming through conditioning, because it's coming from the outside and you're experiencing that. So the wisdom is always there too. True authority comes from your own inner authority or your outer authority process, which, again, is taking into consideration all of your design. So you use your authority to decide what to hold on to and not. So when I'm going through my move, I'm watching where my energy is. Do I have the energy for this or not? We'll get rid of it if I don't have the energy for it. Is there a response still to this or not? Is there a neutral response? Is it a mind that's now convincing me to want it and to keep it? And gee, how great that would be. Well, what if this? Those are mental decisions. Those are not sacral decisions. And so what's worthy of being in your life, hanging on to in the moment, don't forget this is in the moment. It could change radically 180 degrees the next moment. It's so different to live splenically. And the only way you can, live splenically when 100% is if that's your authority. If you've got other defined, if you're sacrally defined or solar plexus defined, that is not your authority. It could be a very good messenger, but it's not your authority. But this true self lets you be aware of your health and what your body needs. My body told me I had to take a break. My body told me that at this moment you're starting to overtax your immune system. I didn't get sick, but that's because I had to trust my response. So wisdom is your potential ability to, take care of yourself. Become very wise about your system of health and not get attached to what everybody else says is healthy. That's another thing that I watch is, people getting very rigidly attached to their remedies that may in one moment solve a health issue, but the very next moment it may be a whole different circumstance, and yet they're still hanging on to that solution as if it's the only one there that could possibly take care of them. So those of you that have it defined, you do create a conditioned influence in other people around you. You can also sometimes put pressure for them to be spontaneous. If a person's got an open splenic center, they're not really able to be spontaneous. You may not have thought about that if you have it defined. You take it for granted. People overtax their immune system sometimes because in the past, especially when they were young, it just always sort of took care of it for you. You can't keep doing that and over, taxing it and for a long period of time. It's just it will run it down. Having a Jasper, having an undefined, is there a way to avoid the influence of others' aura without, well, when you start coming up with a mental way to do it, Jasper, it gets in the way of your real life. You've got to trust your authority to navigate through all of it. It's not a problem. It's not something to avoid. If we're here to be able to grow and evolve through our openness, you don't have to avoid it. You just have to enter into it correctly. And what I notice is my sacral will tell me when or not to engage. And it's not personal to the person, it's just protecting me. And so when I get into a situation, as an example, someone invited me to lunch who I'd known for years and years and years very closely in the human design community, and they were passing through and they wanted to, meet me for lunch. And I didn't really have a response. It was kind of a non-response. But what happened is I met the person who, by the way, has an autoimmune system disease, and they were really not in a good state. I took in that energy. I took in that unhealthy feeling within my body, and I was a little bit off the rest of the day. I had to kind of take a nap, and I just didn't, I didn't get done what I had thought I was going to get done. And what I notice is I'm not someone that responds to going to hospitals. I've just, some people love the experience of that. I don't, maybe because of my openness. So going back to your chat comments, let's see. Sorry, I scrolled up too fast. So Seema says that you have it undefined, however, very spontaneous. Is that due to your sacral? My sacral is sometimes spontaneous and sometimes not. So we'll talk about that more at an individual level. I'd like you to remind me of that when we get to class 5. I'm going to keep going because we're getting behind today, but I want to just deal with very, very specific things like that. When we have gone through all the open centers, what I've learned from teaching this many, many times is if we try to pinpoint with each center what's going on, we really get lost in the details. Because what I've learned is these things don't happen in isolation. It's kind of like when you've got a bunch of open centers. It's like having a bunch of kids in the back seat of a car, and you're driving along and they're all making noise. You really don't know which one's the instigator. You know what I mean by that analogy? They're all making a bunch of noise. And so you could think it's all this one kid, but as soon as one kid starts, yelling and screaming, all of them jump on the bandwagon. So it gets very complex to try to isolate it like that and know exactly what makes you spontaneous. Because my guess is that's not always true, Seema. There's times you are, and there's times that you're not as spontaneous. So this is the kind of thing that we get to start stepping back as we go through this program and be the observer, neutral observer. Just take it all in. Start watching and experimenting and seeing what is going to emerge for you as you, open up the avenue of this experiment. So yes, the effect that a defined has is and I lived with someone for over 36 years who was very, very defined splenically and also sacral, very much healthy and alive when they were being spontaneous, and really hampered when they couldn't be spontaneous. That was something that they felt, within their life that was correct for them. So when you're partnering with someone like that and you're not really able to know when it's healthy for you to be spontaneous, then that can lead to some challenges. I was sick quite a bit at the beginning of the relationship until I found my own strength, my own voice, my own sacral voice that said, today I can't. You go ahead and have fun, but I can't do it today. Or we learned that there was like a building up. What felt like spontaneity wasn't. It was planned. So the person might say, gee, I feel like going somewhere today. that triggered a response in me that said, be on the alert to see, maybe I will and maybe I won't. And that in itself was not spontaneous. So it gave me almost like an ability to work my way into being ready for anything. See how that was not spontaneous, but almost like a over time I'm getting ready to be spontaneous. So there's tricks that you start to observe that happen for you that, you know, again, might call for a little different conclusion. So the natural state of a defined is to tune in, tune in, tune in. Don't overlook this great part of your design that has an awareness at a physical body level that might trigger signs to you to pay attention to something. You have to trust it. Trust your gut. Trust your hunches, your intuition, your instincts. It doesn't mean if you're defined emotionally or sacrally, and it's the sacral response isn't tied to the splenic center, it doesn't mean you can immediately take action on it because it may be a little distorted. It's just giving you input that over time, if you're, you know, emotionally defined, will, you know, meld into what is truth. And if it's defined, it's going to give you the ability to offer a sense of well-being to those that are correct for you and vice versa. So it has a fixed way of processing fear because it consistently filters fear in a certain way for you because it's part of your nature, part of your design. And so you're going to experience that over your lifetime. And even if you have it dormant, you'll have, you know, a fixed way of dealing with maybe whatever is dormant, but not necessarily operating within a defined part of your life force. It's still conditioning. If you've got it defined, my goodness, it's so easy in the world of the mind and the emotional powerful energy that comes from a solar plexus to ignore your instincts. Just, you know, it's too quiet. Now, some people, you know, experience that. We'll talk about the splenic awareness center as an authority later. Today, we're just looking at it from a functioning center. So your mind and other people's emotions can very much overwhelm your instincts because that's, again, where the focus of the not self will be. So if it's undefined, just be comfortable taking your time with what life brings. I just have learned through the years, I'm not really spontaneous. I need a little moment to integrate my sacral energy into what it's going to offer. And I have to honor that, to give my best self to others, but also to be correct. And that means my authority has to be what I trust. So it's something that I feel comfortable with my health. I take good care of myself. I've learned a lot about things in life, you know, through my experiences. And I've learned when to confront fears appropriately, when I'm not confronting fears appropriately, because you get all kinds of lessons both ways. And ultimately, as an undefined, you gotta learn to let go or hang on, but not all the time. You've really got to learn how to honor, you know, your sense of well-being, safety, and security. So dependent on relationships, that's a possibility. You know, because again, that bond that's created with that feel good. Okay, so let's keep going. The Ajna Center. And the Ajna Center is now in a different realm, and it's one that's been around for 90,000 years. So if you think about this as an ongoing collective consciousness that we share with each other as outer authority, and we have the ability to be self-reflected, you're reflecting on your awareness. And this one, if you read in your manual about the timing, it retains the awareness over all of time for you. I remember a student panicking and saying, oh my God, it said if you make a not self decision, you can never undo it and it's with you for all of time. Well, what that meant was that a not self whatever experience is one you're going to retain, because that was the awareness you took in. That's what you're going to base your mental judgments and concepts on. It doesn't mean it doesn't get replaced. It continues to evolve. It continues to be aware, and new formulations of concepts, reasons, theories, and answers can be evolved through your self-reflected consciousness. It might be like it was for me, something that I retain in my memory so well. I'm more cautious about maybe where I will go to eat, as an example. Much more aware of there's the possibility in any situation of taking in something that could make you sick. So you can retain that, use that as a building of wisdom and sharing of examples or stories or things that you can offer other people so they don't have to go through the same thing, because it's a part of what you have to share through your own outer authority of your mental cognitive potential. But what if you have it open and recognize that there's an inconsistency in how you are conceptualizing things? It's really more of a melding together of many, many things that you're grappling with mentally. And if that makes you nervous because it switches or changes, or you're not sure what to think about it, you might feel that that's a vulnerability in terms of other people evaluating you. You might want to therefore take a rigid stand. That's not what I was thinking. This is the way I was thinking, or this is how I should think. In other words, trying to convince yourself or others that you're certain. That's a trap, because that's not allowing the fluidity of what could or couldn't be true in that moment, of how you could, be pulling together different ways to see it and perspectives. That is really a kind of a natural gift you have if it's open. So you can become sort of defensive, conceptually defensive, as you try to convince people you're certain of something. You could hold on to concepts. Maybe you were raised to believe a certain thing and you just accept it, and that's the way it is, and you're not going to talk about it, and you're not going to entertain the idea it might be off, or you may have made a mistake, or all of these things can become barriers to the potential of this center. And sometimes we do get a little stuck in the way we think. And those that have it defined can come across as very rigidly fixed on the way they think. But I would, just propose that too is just because at that moment they are feeling certain about that way of thinking. Not that it has to be the only way of thinking, because I think a lot of people with the defined ajna can experience the fact that it's just the way they think. It doesn't mean it's the way everyone should think. And those things can also be somewhat confused. So Mona says, oh, and I missed one. I missed the comment up above about how would a defined spleen create an autoimmune disease? Not self, or just because life created a body that was prone to it. It doesn't mean that's bad or good. It means that life brings about all kinds of things you can learn and grow through. And then Mona says, 2 of my daughters and me are open in the ajna, I assume. We have gotten used to saying, I don't know and I don't care. It has drastically improved our relationship. Oh, good. Yeah. So many ways that when you just try new things, just to see if it reduces resistance, if it allows more of movement and openness with another, those are all really good things to just experiment with. So having to force yourself to figure things out, is something, to kind of watch for. Trying to have everything in your life sort of clear and certain, and know what your next move's going to be and be certain about that. You can speculate what you think might happen, especially for some people who are very logical thinkers, but let's be honest, life is life, and life is messy, and life sometimes works out the way we think it will, and sometimes it doesn't. And trying to figure it out in the moment can sometimes feel futile. I have to know the answer. I can't wait. It's got to be now. These kinds of pressures can create a forced decision just because you're uncomfortable with uncertainty. I find, because of the way my ajna is defined, that one of the traps for me, even though it was defined, was that I have a certain gait that tends to be good for coming up with answers if I'm asked, and and I had the energy for it and it's correct for me to do that. But doesn't mean just because I can come up with the answers that I should come up with the answers, or that they're the right answers. And so what I learned is that people that got to know me knew I did have an awful lot of ways of seeing things that helped him, a lot of answers or suggestions or experiences or ideas. And so they would tend to come to me rather than figuring things out for themselves. It's like, well, gee, where'd I put my keys? Well, I don't know, but I seem to would come up with an answer. It's like, well, have you checked here? Well, and I found that before there was Google, I was probably Google, because I was going to always answer everybody's questions. I was running around putting all my energy into everybody else's focused interest and inspiration, and not really if I had the energy for it or not. It was a lot of people saving their time. Just go ask Carol. She's, going to come up with a Google answer. So it was freedom for me to finally realize I don't have to know the answer to everything. I don't even have to remember everything, even though I have a very photographic memory and I do remember details nobody has any idea I do, but I do. I do notice that I can have so much around me, and it mentally disabled me to move because of the chaos around me. I need things to be orderly in the way my visual gets really distracted by too much chaos. I can't think straight. I have to wait until things are sort of cleared up or cleaned up so that I can think straight, because I know how I think. It's a consistent aspect of my nature. So if you have absolutely open ajna, Cecilia, you do. That's Asima, you do. Does this resonate with you? And sometimes not knowing what to think. Here, I'm asking you what you think. What do you think? Is this something that you even know what to think about at times? It may not even occur to you to think about some things at times. So, this type of experience, it's just, again, there's nothing to hang on to as a thought. They come and go. It's like breathing in and breathing out. Thoughts are there and thoughts aren't there. So these gates that pop up here, again, take into consideration these themes can lock you into a certain fear that can get exaggerated, create, exaggerations, distortions, misunderstandings, and conclusions as a result of this type of awareness that you hang on to. You know, if you're someone who has a certain way you're designed in your ajna because of maybe some certain activated dormant gates or whatever, then you can have triggers, as Annette said, triggers that can create feelings within you. And maybe it's an anxiety of hopelessness. When you think you've got things figured out, it's like you've just heard about this wonderful human design, and it's starting to give you answers to all kinds of stuff you've been trying to figure out your whole life. And it seems simple enough because the more, the less you know about human design, the more simple it seems. And then the more and more you learn about it, the more complex it becomes and the more detail it becomes. Oh my God, this is a deep system. So if it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, it's adding more and more complexity to what you know. Sometimes it gets a little more confusing when you start in these classes. But if that's part of your process to see the big picture before it gets clear, then just be okay with that. Just recognize you're just gathering more pieces of the puzzle before it'll all make sense. And that can feel like once you finally make it make sense and it's clear, and then one more thing comes up, another experience happens, and it's like, well, wait a second, how does that relate? You know, I've studied all these other systems. Now, how do I pull them all together? They don't all relate. That can be very confusing, very distracting. And then, again, under too much mental anxiety, you feel like it's futile. It'll never be clear. So ignorance, I think that one's kind of clear, not knowing the answer, or never would, never being able to explain to people and knowing you have, because let's face it, not everything that's new, that is the thoughts that are just popped in, are translatable in the moment. There's my gate 4, the chaos, fear of chaos, that there won't be order in my life. It's just going to be piles forever. And then we have gate 11. I thought at first that darkness meant, someone turns the lights off. But this is a center that's about knowledge, intellect and knowledge and ideas and, concepts and opinions and things you can know and things you can't know. So what if it all goes away? I mean, the ultimate would be someone takes away your ability to formulate concepts. That was one thing I know my father, who had an open ajna, he was brilliant teacher. He was a professor of all kinds of sciences, and he even ran a planetarium, taught astrology, not astrology, astronomy. And one of his biggest fears was he was going to lose his mind. And of course, he did at the end get dementia, which was so sad because it was one of his biggest anxieties, that might happen, and that he would slowly but surely start to lose some of the things he used to, to grapple with and be excited to learn. The 43 is a gate again of someone who's really an innovative kind of thinker, but can be afraid that that little brilliant insight they just had would be rejected. It wouldn't make sense to people. They'd call you a freak. Or again, those of us that have gate 17 or get conditioned by someone with a gate 17 can fear, well, what if they challenge me? What if I don't have the details ready for, someone to prove I'm right or wrong? These are things that we just are investigating today. And so the Ajna Center, almost 50% have it open. And so if you're pretending to be certain to avoid, the humiliation or, having insights challenged, ideas challenged, just be aware of that potential. Needing to have tools for your memory to show that you're right, all kinds of things can emerge from a decision if you follow the root of where that decision's coming from to see what it's for. You know, and again, as Mona had said, just having the ability to say, I don't know. I don't really know right now. I don't care to know right now. Maybe later I would. And to recognize that what matters to you to care, or that what you can remember and not remember is may just be momentarily a situation too. You can't always be certain about everything. You don't have to pretend. If you don't know, you don't know. If you don't remember, you don't remember. I remember as a fellow student of mine, we were study buddies in my first few classes of human design. We had an instructor at the time who couldn't remember, I think it was a channel name or something like that. And I remember this other student saying to me, and they're a teacher? I don't get it. I don't get how they could be a teacher. They don't even know their stuff. And I remember thinking, oh no, they just don't remember it right now. There's too many things to remember. I have a whole binder. All these years later, I have a binder of things and notes I've taken that are my little cheat sheets, just in case I have one of those moments of flash that blanks it all out. You know, you can just look at your notes. It's okay. It's nice with an open head. I have a totally open head to know that I can write something down and let go of trying to have to retain it. And most of the times what I write down is just to get it out of my head, because it doesn't really matter anyway. Wisdom is knowing what to be certain about, recognizing which ideas, insights, opinions are useful, practical, worthy. And if it's defined, be aware. There is sometimes this expectation that other people can think the way you do. And by that, having a certain sense of connection with your way of thinking that's consistent, that you can, know and recognize as yours. And that's something that I think takes empathy, practice, and awareness and acceptance. We have to be aware of how uniquely different we are from each other. So thinking. That's, what you do when you got it defined. It's what all of us do anyway. But obsessively sometimes when you've got a defined Ashna center, it can be very hard to, have that stop thinking while you're also trying to experiment with living your design, because it's so rigidly a part of your nature. And yet you have a natural, healthy way of correctly knowing this is your limitation. You can enjoy it. It's very important in processing hub for forming our comprehension. You offer, avenues for others with your natural design when you're with them. I'm not influenced by the presence of someone else with their own preferences and predispositions. It's not that I have an opinion about them either. But they can't condition my thinking while I'm in their configured presence. They can open up and expand my thinking by the sharing of outer authority, but they can't substitute it, I guess I could say. And so my mind will still operate consistent, specific, and in my way I recognize. And maybe that's also true for those of you that have a defined ajna. Maybe you recognize that. It's just part of our nature. Oh yeah, I totally get that, Laura. It's very easy to stay in your head for, but also just be aware. It doesn't matter really, because you will be that and more. And so you just have to still kind of recognize it, see it, and still follow your strategy and authority as a result. So undefined, just imagine having no consistent way of thinking, taking in information like a sponge, letting it be in no particular process that's fixed, I've noticed people, I don't know if this is true for some of you with undefined, but I've noticed people with undefined liking tools that helps them pull concepts together. Like I remember one client of mine for many years, brilliant thinker, she used Venn diagrams. She liked to see where things intersected and brought natural connections. It helped her process her thinking. She also liked mind maps, you know, for concluding things. To me, they were just very free-form, confusing. It didn't help me at all. I find those things sort of yeah, took me away from my own logical process or abstract process. So there's a fluid and adaptable mental process that allows you to stay open to concepts and ideas, not being concerned about, you know, what it looks like, having a certain answer or not. And then just enjoy playing in that field of uncertainty, just letting the thoughts kind of float in or float out, not being particularly rigid about what you believe, the valuable concepts, but being able to recognize them for when they're there. You may find that you really feed off of other people's ideas and you feel deprived if you're not rich in an environment where everybody's sharing ideas. Watch that too, because that doesn't mean that you're being that you're losing anything. These things are all just things to start recognizing, because anything that shuts down the absolute of your thinking and perspective could be taking you away from your true potential. So any kind of defined with an obsessive thinking process, it can sometimes be relentless. Like if you wake up in the middle of the night and you start hashing over something and thinking, it's hard to let go. Sometimes I've found that just as a mental habit, which seems to help, when I go to bed at night, unless I'm exhausted and I'm just going to go straight to bed, I might read things, not intellectual things that make me think, but things that make me bored, that will shut down my thinking, or just zone out. You know, maybe even watching some TV or having some background noise that zones out my focused thinking, because then it's relaxing. I let go. You know, it allows my mind to float away and to kind of go into a different state, preparing to sleep. And then again, a not self is using the mind for your personal decisions. That never should enter into the realm of anybody, including those you can see here using the mind to make decisions on the undefined. Or again, concluding something and then never letting go. I've had people um, you know, go into a restaurant, and if I wasn't comfortable in a restaurant and we left, then thinking and saying, well, you don't like that place, you're never going to go. Well, no, it was just true that moment. I'm very open to trying it again, but concluding something so quickly that that's what you then defend. Oh no, you've said you didn't like that place. So these kinds of things feel to each other off when you know you're with a person, and energetically you can feel they have an openness in their mind, and yet they're trying to be very, very rigidly defensive. Those things feel something's off. It just, if I'm with someone who's defined in their ajna and they're equally rigid in their thinking, it's like, yeah, I get it, I know where they're coming from, and it feels energetically correct. It's a totally different experience. So those are the two awareness centers. And we're at the end of our time, but what I'd like to do is enter into the realm of the solar plexus as a nice balance, just as far as we get until we get to the gates, and then I'll pick up the rest of that in our next class. Is anyone able to stay just a few minutes longer with me to do that? How do you feel about that? Taking in your decision-making process, what do you think? Are you done? Are you filled? Do you want to stop? Or just a few more minutes longer? I don't see any chat. Oh, I do see chat. Lots of chat popping up. I'm in. Bring it on. Ready for this? Okay, let's go. Let's do it. So when we step back again and look at these awareness centers, we got body awareness. You could say the ajna is mind awareness. By the way, the ajna center is very tied to, I don't even think I really addressed that, and I should have. So you know what? I'm going to also just zoom back. Oops, not forward, but back, and talk about that. I think that's good to put into relative terms. The pituitary gland is one that's biologically kind of tuned in to things going on all through the system. It sort of checks in. I always have an image in my mind, I'm very visual, of sort of someone who's a security guard who's sitting there with their monitors, you know, checking out the building and with their little cameras and, you know, making sure everything's okay and everything's in order and there's nothing unusual, you know, and then they'll spot, you know, if they go into a room and something's moved, you know, there shouldn't have been anyone in there, what's going on? And then that gives their attention. That's where the focus is. And so when you consider that, again, you know, that's something it's doing, is always checking in with the different things and kind of pulling it together and becoming aware of it. When you now come to the solar plexus, we are back in our form. We're not up here in our head, we're back in our form. And we're in our form where there's feelings. These are different kind of feelings. This is an awareness that isn't just this basic survival mechanism. This is not in the moment alert, protecting, you know, what's happening right now. Well, now, what about now? And what about now? That's not the way this one operates. This one has a unique circumstance where it's also a motor, meaning it's literally generating a field of energy that operates, in this case as a motor, as a wave, a frequency that operates through a wave. That means that at any data point in a wave, it's just a positional perspective. To go through the entire scope of the intelligence, you've got to go through all the different perspectives that are brought through the wave. And so this is one that is more of an integration with data points over time. That's why there is a melding together of perspectives that, again, has to happen over a period of the entire time frame of that wave. So we say here on the slide, spirit awareness. I think that was just a play on body, mind, and spirit. If you look at the definitive book of human design, it'll say social awareness, because this is where we get into the realm of connection. Social awareness is relational awareness, you know, the relationships between things, the integration of things. And so biologically, when you think about the kidneys and the pancreas, and obviously how that is functioning even in the form of what we hang on to or let go of, there's a selection process of, you know, it's not just like the spleen that says you're in or you're out. The kidneys are really sort of breaking down and dissecting, well, what do I absorb and what do I also eliminate? There's a processing of it. So it's tied to your emotional nervous system. Even your nervous system is very, very complex. And if you've gone in for a massage and you've been complaining, maybe you have a neck ache, and then through the time of sort of digging into where is the pain really originating from, it could be coming from a pinched nerve in your shoulder. You know, it's not your neck, but it's a sympathetic experience of all of the energy and where it's coming from. Very complex, almost like, you know, its own brain. And we have passions here. We have irrationality. We've got potential emotional intelligence. We never talked about emotional intelligence 50 years ago. We were all about the IQ. What's your IQ? Let's measure your IQ. We'll see what your potential in life is going to be. No, they discovered back in fact, I was in a leadership development company, a consulting company, when Daniel is it Goldberg or Goldman? I can't now remember, who created emotional intelligence. Are you aware of that book? We call it, it's called EQ, your emotional quotient. And they did testing to determine that leaders and companies were more prone to be effective leaders, better leaders, not based on their IQ, but based on their EQ, their ability to relate to others, their form of empathy for others, acceptance of other, be able to see someone else's perspective even though it's not your experience. And so all of these things come about in the development of our awareness of the world around us. And it's so much more tied to our connection with life. So you might realize there's more to life than just surviving another day. Where's the rich aspect of sharing with others? This is the realm of the solar plexus. And so if you are open and sensitive to all kinds of feelings that you can be experiencing through your maybe inconsistent processor of emotions, then it can be uncomfortable dealing with that. Think about a child born who, what we do know is their nervous system is not fully developed when they're born. And so they're very sensitive to all kinds of things that could happen. That's why when you made the comment, Jasper, about sensitivity, I kind of felt there was more to it than that. I want everyone to know here, and I'll say that's also true for Laura. Jasper and Laura actually have and Cecilia, again, has a totally open solar plexus. So that can be quite an experience. You can, again, be overwhelmed by all kinds of sensitivity to experiences of feelings. Or you could be totally numb to it. It's like, God, what's everybody feeling? I don't feel anything at all. Because those two, configurations can create, these kinds of things. So the question Jasper has is, I have an undefined open solar plexus. Do I still have emotional waves that I should take into account? What you have is the experience of emotions that are being triggered for you, just like any open center, through conditioning. So always your experience and connection to emotions has been triggered by a conditioning experience that is your, it's engaging your feelings, right? Again, it's like so many times people think, well, I have an open ajna, so those thoughts are not mine, or these emotions are not mine. Well, you have a solar plexus, so when you're activated by outside external conditioning, you are experiencing emotions, right? They are your emotions, aren't they? They're just being triggered by and taking in and empathetically aligning with and integrating with everybody else's feelings. I went through a coach program many years ago, and I'm fine when I'm not physically in the aura of a lot of people because I'm very sensitive to that kind of energy. And so when I'm in a room, I learned, because I did Living Your Design workshops live person to person for a while, and I would be overwhelmed and distracted, mentally distracted by all kinds of energy in the room. So I found I could think more clearly if I was doing online classes. So it's just something I learned about myself. But when I went through my coach testing to become certified, we were practicing doing real life coaching, and we were evaluated. And so I was coached by someone being evaluated by another instructor. And they were hitting all these issues for me. So I was getting highly emotional, triggered by all kinds of painful things, and, getting very weepy and all this stuff. And then immediately after it was over, they said, okay, now it's time for you to coach. Well, I was too sensitive. I was too overwhelmed by emotions and distracted. And I really should have. I had no response at the time to do my testing. I should have said so. But I was avoiding conflict and truth. I was afraid, oh, well, you need to be braver. You need to be stronger. You need to, show that you can do it. I need to prove myself, my open ego. So I did a very poor coaching job as a result. And now I did do it again later, and all of this kind of stuff, and I did pass. But it was something that I was so overwhelmed by the emotions. I couldn't follow my own true self. I was really overwhelmed. You can just simply detach, and things like that you learn to do. You can start to recognize all these feelings welling up in you are really beautiful as being a human and connected to life. And they're just being triggered by all kinds of things. It's nothing you have to get all, emotional about or mental about. These are things that you feel. You can feel them. You're human. And, as Laura said, she feels everything. It taps into a realm of expressed intelligence that comes from someplace more than your mind, right? But let's focus on the not self, because the open center, it will create behaviors that can actually limit your truth. It can have you avoid things because mentally you've got a whole story behind it. Being very touchy, very nervous, being afraid of consequences, not wanting to upset someone. I like the term not wanting to rock the boat. It's like, I'll just keep everything calm. It's a pretend, because boats are designed to rock. I mean, they rock and they flow, and they go with this and they go with that, and they just ride the wave. But at times you don't know what to feel, just like at times you don't know what to think. You don't know what to be afraid of. You don't know how to react. Maybe there's not enough from the outside to create clarity about that. So the not self-talk, again, will create the strategy, will create the essence of where you're basing your decision. And it has nothing to do with what your destiny or your journey or your natural state would have been had you just noticed it, experienced it, connected with it for what it is, and yet still followed your strategy and authority. So the no gates, not knowing what to feel, feeling everything simultaneously. Again, there's no real clear focus for the feel. It's just, I can't imagine what it would be like, but but I'm very curious about it, obviously. And so, Cecilia, haven't heard. I didn't notice if you were able to join us today. I'm just going to flip through and see if you're here. No, when you get this recording, we'd love to hear your comments too. We've been able to connect a little bit with Jasper and Laura, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you'd like to post some things on the forum, all of you, by the way, if these conversations today were triggering examples, experiences, memories, things that brought more clarity or more insights into your own experience, I offer you the chance to share with each other. It really is enriching when you do. So here we are at the gates. And so I just want to, again, make note for those of you who are looking. Oh, I'm glad. I was just reading the analogy of the boat riding the wave. And it's true also, Mona, for those of us that have it undefined. I mean, we really take in someone else's boat ride. That's what I'm trying to say. Boy, I know you're on a boat ride because I feel the rocking of the boat. You know, that's something we go through. And I used to say, I don't want to feel a rocking boat right now. I'm running the other way. But that's not really what I've learned. I used to ask coaches I watched go to deep areas with people, really emotional, sensitive places. And I said, how do you do it? How do you avoid getting swept up in the emotion? They said, you, you just let it flow through. When Ra was open in his solar plexus too, and when I would have readings or sessions or classes with him, and things would come up and I would ask about that, he said, you got to toughen up. You got to get a thick skin. You got to be able to feel the pain, because that's what life has sometimes. It has pain and it has pleasure, and it comes from this center. And we have things to experience that is painful, and we have things to experience that are very pleasurable. And both of those are what makes life so much different than, the black and white of I'm alive. That's it. So we've got different color shadings. Do you notice that on some of these gates? We don't teach circuitry in the Living Your Design workshop. You start getting introduced to circuitry and themes of circuitry in the ABC class, but I just want to have you note that there is movement of energy through this motor that's moving along the pathways of circuitry. As you've seen, all of the channels connected create a circuitry in the body graph. And they have certain themes that are associated with the waves. And I will bring up the waves when we talk about your emotional authority, because I think it's helpful for an emotionally defined person to start identifying the complexity of their movement of frequency, the wave itself, and their different patterns. And so we have the gate 37, 6, and also 49 that are a part of what we call tribal circuitry. It creates a pattern that's tribal wave. And I guess you could say the essence of that is there's a need, this need for support or a need to be needed kind of energy that's, kind of a theme for it. But these are fears, the fear of tradition. Again, people say, well, what does that mean? Well, in the world, traditions handed down generation after generation, there's traditional roles. Like in a family, you could say the traditional role of a family is, the father. In some cultures, the father was the patriarch. He was the authority. The mother, had a certain traditional role, and we even see, even left over in our society, there's traditions that come whether you're female or male, and even traditions about when you grow up, you're going to get a job and you're going to support yourself and you're going to get married and you're going to have kids. These are expected traditions. It also forms the basis and foundation for bargains. What's fair, what's not fair. And so these themes, can also be focuses of fears for people. I'm afraid of taking on the roles everyone expects me to take because I may not be able to do that. Or, gee, I wish I could fill this need, and can I always fill this need? Fear of intimacy, being open to others that could hurt you or not, revealing and exposing yourself at the most intimate way, the vulnerabilities of who you are. That can be a fear. Nature, people we're not quite sure what that means. Well, nature is a powerful force. And if you kind of go back and recognize that, as humans can be very civilized, we can also be very uncivilized. I mean, after all, we did kind of come from being a mammal and an ape, and, getting very radical and unpredictable as nature can be. can also be something. You know, it's also tied to rejection, being rejected from a group. There's all kinds of stuff that can come from themes when you start looking at it from also the realm of circuitry. But when you look at the individual gates, the 12 or 22 and the 55, you know, they have their themes too. So what a fear of silence can be is that nobody's listening. Nobody's sharing. Nobody's talking. You know, and again, if you're in the mood and other people aren't in the mood, there's all kinds of things that can be triggered by that. Sadness, depression, hopelessness. There's things that can be, that then the mind invents a story about. So we've got the 55, the gate of the spirit. There's that lack of connection that can feel like emptiness. And then, you know, you can take that to a state of personal, feeling very personally isolated even. And then we have desire as a realm of the collective areas. And here again, we have fear of inadequacy. But remember, this time the inadequacy is more about how you're able to really engage with or integrate with or connect with things that you're not normally experienced with. You know, if you're inexperienced, you don't have the adequate skills to deal with something that's new. It's kind of a crisis. It's these can show up in different ways. I have this fear, and I remember on my first year report card, my parents didn't have the money to send me to kindergarten, so I went directly into first grade. They thought kindergarten, and at the time I think it was true, was just to teach a person to be social with other kids, and I was already pretty social. So they thought, oh, she can skip it and make it up. Well, what it created was an inadequacy as far as my experience with dealing with other kids in an environment that I wasn't that exposed to, you know, and experienced with. And so in my first year report card, I got a report card that said she's a little bit oversensitive. You know, she's a little immature emotionally. And, you know, quite honestly, I'm sure that was true because I hadn't been exposed to the experiences to build up that thick skin, as Ra called it. So we have you know, again, these gates, and I skipped over the last one there of feelings. But when we enter into something with a strong desire to feel something and connect with something very deeply, you've already built an expectation in your mind of what's going to happen or not happen. And that can build, you know, kind of a big, huge shift in what you are really experiencing in the moment, and a story behind that too. So these are just some gates, and we'll finish up the rest of the solar plexus looking at the not self strategies, etc., as we also enter into looking at motors in our next week's class. But I do not require, I want everyone so totally being themselves and comfortable that you can share and not share and be who you are, that you don't feel any pressure to meet any expectations of another. But I do encourage, if you have the energy, if you have, and you're just thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't, feel free to share what you want to share, knowing that people will take it in and they may or may not be able to react right away because they're really reflecting. A lot of times people really are reflectors. It takes a while for them to know what they might say. Or maybe there's nothing to say, but they really appreciated your sharing. So these are things you can play with the forum. And it will, again, just because the realm of social awareness is an enriching awareness that expands our capacity to relate and to integrate with others, it's always encouraged. So that's it for today. How did it go? Sorry, again, I'm still a little bit sloppy with the Zoom platform. I'm getting better. I'm getting more comfortable, but yeah, more to go. More to go. So I'll see you guys in a week. Thank you so much for being here, and happy Valentine's. Bye for now.